Hello, Stewards, and welcome to your in-depth briefing on the Frostlands and its importance to the city. As the city is growing, so are its needs. Though the people might be plentiful for now, the deposits in the city will not last forever. It will not allow us to survive the whiteouts as they come in indefinitely, and thus we do need to explore outside the limits of the city itself to find more resources. But to do that, we need logistics districts. Logistics districts, which can be found in the district's menu, allow us to explore the Frostland. They don't just provide Frostland teams. You need one to exist so you can explore the Frostland at all. You won't be able to see the map until at least one of these exists. These will provide Frostland teams, or scouts, however you wish to call them. Though they only provide a small amount at first, various buildings and, as you can see, certain laws can increase the amount of Frostland teams you acquire. These teams are critical. If without any Frostland teams, you cannot explore the Frostland effectively, and without lots of teams, exploration will take a long time. The Frostland itself is vast, very vast. There are many points of interest that dot the landscape, each with their own details. Every little thing on this map can matter in some way. Bits of food, oil, coal, materials, even the elusive steam cores that we cannot produce ourselves in the city but are needed for our continued growth and survival. The only way to explore the Frostland is with those Frostland teams, and various territories have higher Frostland team costs. Initially, we might only be faced with plains, vast expanses of low elevation. They only cost about 10 teams to explore and usually don't take as long as other teams. But eventually we could be running into things such as cracked glaciers and tall ice walls. These not only need more teams, but they tend to take a lot longer to explore, not forgetting to account for the estimated time of arrival as well, which will only further increase the time it takes to chart the terrain of the area and explore any points of interest. It'll be easier to explore things near the city first, too, of course, because with how close they are, the scouts will not take much time to reach them. But the further they go, the longer it takes. We can use various buildings and laws to help reduce the time of exploration, and the correct infrastructure can allow the scouts to reach the new edges of terrain much sooner. One of the key things you might find, aside from one-time benefits, such as this in the exhausted mine that our scouts found earlier, is outposts. Outposts are points of interests that have deposits to harvest. Think of them like the districts harvesting wood or coal in the city. These two work the same way, but a little different at the same time. These can be turned on and off like districts, but they will use Frostland teams to harvest from them, and will normally require 10 Frostland teams, though certain laws can modify this. But just like the points of interest in the city, these have limited deposits that will eventually run out. But you can see the output that they produce, and if you have areas aside from the city, you can decide to send it to those instead, but we will talk more about that later, Stewards. You can, of course, also again turn these off if you need some Frostland teams to conduct some additional exploration. But there is something else aside from outposts. Certain outposts are actually possible to make into settlements. Settlements are different from outposts. First off, they will have a higher production level. They will be able to produce resources indefinitely, which is a key importance as this could allow the city to survive almost indefinitely. However, these settlements cannot be managed by just a few Frostland teams. They will need workers, which means they will need people from the city to go and permanently settle there. They'll also need prefabs in order to build the settlement, and at least one steam core to produce heat. That way they do not freeze to death. These settlements will have different requirements aside from Frostland teams to maintain it. In the case of coal, you will need materials to maintain the mine and food to maintain the people. The Frostland teams are also necessary as someone must send these resources back to the city, and who better than those trained for the Frostland? The first time you establish it in a coal mine, you get about 800 people are sent there, along with an output of 500 coal being sent back to the city every day permanently. However, These settlements and outposts can still be disabled by whiteout stewards. Just like the city is entrapped by a whiteout, so too are outposts and settlements. Though there is an exception. If you are willing to fork over the cost and the investment, another 1,200 people can be sent to coal mine settlements, as an example, with. Excuse me, Stuart, the city is quite sick. With additional prefabs and cores. This will increase the material and food costs the settlement needs, as it is now larger, but the output will be increased even further, and, most importantly, whiteouts will no longer disable the settlement, allowing it to produce indefinitely, forever, so long as it is appropriately connected back to the city. There is a key problem, however, Stuart. Trails are inadequate for settlements. Whereas outposts can run fine on a trail, settlements require at least a skyway, which is more expensive. To give you an example, trails require 25 stamps per segment and 5 prefabs per segment. One segment is a point from one area to another. This accounts for one segment. This accounts for 2 segments. It doesn't matter how long the segment is, it will always be the same cost per segment. So it is wise to make the routes as long as possible to minimize the cost. Skyways are more expensive, using 50 heat stamps, but only 20 prefabs. They are actually that much more expensive, stewards, do not worry. They do require the same amount of Frostland teams, however, but more importantly, they have a much longer range. This is 2 segments of Skyway. This is 2 segments of trails. They have a much further reach. Though, of course, tougher terrain will still make it harder to go up, and certain areas are impassable, though that is a rare occurrence. If you wish to establish a settlement, not only will you need the cores, but skyways will need to be established to allow for ample transport between the settlement and the city. And you must make sure, Stuart, that any of these trails or skyways you make properly reconnect to the city from one of the hooks. Now these hooks right here, this hook and this hook, are entry points into our city. Once you uncover the old way stations that logistic districts can be built on, which are shown by a compass when you're zoomed into the city, these areas will open up as well and allow you to automatically begin connecting trails and skyways to them. If a route is not connected back to the city properly, it cannot send resources back, with the exception being common herds, which can be harvested by just the scout teams, and then anything that just needs scout teams to bring it back are at a one-time system, such as the coal from the exhausted mine. Everything else, however, that is regarded as an outpost or a settlement is going to require that route to send it back. Furthermore, if you're curious as to what outposts can become settlements, any outpost with this symbol, such as this coal outpost, can become settlements. You do not need to settle it to know if it can become a settlement. You will know the moment you find it in the Frostland with the help of the scout teams. For example, we know that this tar pit cannot become a settlement at all. It will be only an outpost at best. But we do know that this oil rig can be turned into a settlement to turn its temporarily 30 million deposit of oil into a more permanent source of fuel for the city. Or perhaps to turn it into other things like materials. With all that said, however, stewards, there is something else to mention. Colonies. The city is important and the city must grow, but the city is still limited in the room it has, and by extension, limited in the amount of people it can house. Therefore, we are going to need colonies, and colonies function a lot like the city, though with some key differences, much like outposts and settlements have their own differences. For an example, we have a food colony that has been very recently established by our colonists. Colonies will have a special community called colonist stewards. These colonists are only focused on their purpose of colonizing our colonies and making sure they're running smoothly. They will not vote in the council, they will not have representation in the council, but nor will they care about the ongoings in the city. Their sole purpose is to colonize the area and grow. So long as their needs are met, there will be no issues. There are also key differences between each colony. We have the food colony here, stewards, but there are also going to be a material colony that can be discovered, and with any luck, fuel colonies that can provide long-term fuel. Each colony has that key difference in that key supply it can provide. The material colony usually has iron and lots of wood. The fuel colony usually has oil, and the food colony almost always has several points of interest that are producing near indefinite resources of food. For example, the current one that we have established has 3 deep deposits of fertile soil that can be used to sustain the city for many, many decades. Each colony will also have a small special output. For example, the food colony will always produce some bits of food and coal. The material colony will always produce some degree of materials, and the oil colony will always produce a small amount of oil, no matter what. It will always come from the colony's furnace, which can take any type of fuel: coal, steam, oil. But it will only use them at the base rates, and these furnaces cannot be upgraded. Where they're at is where they'll stay, but they can be useful long enough with good planning. And each map is going to be a smaller version of the city variant. But colonies are very important. Very important for more reasons. Resource transferring. If you noticed before, the trails had 250 resource capacity. The skyways had 600. It refers to the resource transfer between colonies and the city. Each colony can trade with the city, but colonies cannot trade with another colony. It must go through the city if it wants to trade with anyone. And this will allow you to modify the route at all. For example, we could send lots of coal from the city to the colony, and send lots of food back to the city to keep things well fed. The city could even send materials if we expanded, or goods if we only produce food here. If necessary, you can also use a balance modifier, which I will show in just a moment, stewards. We just need to slightly readjust things here. If there's a deficiency of resources one way and the other side can supply it, you can click a button to meet demand, making it much easier to meet that without having to fine-tune it to a specific level. Of course, you're free to modify it as you please. But something else to note is that colonies will not grow. Unlike the city, which will grow from time to time, depending on how our laws and buildings are affecting our population growth, colonies will not grow at all. They have no means of growing and will never grow. The only way to grow a colony is to send workers. And by workers, we do mean actual people, not just the workers themselves, but also their families. You can do 100 at a time with this, or try to set it more specifically if you wish, but keep in mind to not send too many at once, stewards, or else buildings in the source city will deactivate from too many workers being sent, which you can see right here in the center. So when sending more workers to a colony to expand it, keep in mind the current workforce available in the city. If you send too many, you may start to run into employment problems back home, which could cause new issues. There's a few more things to go over as well, stewards. Firstly, if we want to establish settlements, we do need to research settlement heating as a technology. This is largely regarded as an adaptation technology, and therefore only adaptation-based communities and factions will allow us to acquire this, though it should not be hard. But that can only be done after we've decided the path to take with the generator. There are also several technologies for the Frostland. The Scouts' headquarters, for example, can reduce the time it takes to explore terrain and reduce the territory threat level in much harsher terrains. This threat level is important to note as well. Now that we're mentioning it, it is time to go over it. And for that, we will need to disable our current survivalist headquarters, just so we can go over it more in detail. Very rough and dangerous terrain is often, well, dangerous or even deadly. Without any methods or any laws, this challenging territory is actually deadly, where many scouts will die, and this will effectively be referenced in your city, where hundreds will die as a result. The same thing if it's dangerous, many scouts will be injured. This will cause several hundred people in the city to be injured who will need time to heal, with all the corresponding negative effects to trust that come with it. But with a law, along with those survivalist headquarters, you can make dangerous territory safe to explore. Speaking of which, what law am I talking about? Well, since it is directly related to the Frostland, we will go over it quite quickly. That would be Scouts training. Specifically, Pathfinder Scouts will allow you to drop the territory threat level by an entire level. There are 3 levels, 0, 1, and 2. 0 being safe, 1 being dangerous, 2 being deadly. So long as the territory threat level is 0, there is no threat. The alternative to this law is the mechanized scouts, which will allow your exploration time to be dropped even further should you seek to simply explore the Frostland faster. The other law directly related to the Frostland is outpost operation, but keep in mind, as you might have noticed, it doesn't affect just the outposts, but also settlements, which means this law is quite useful. You can either use it to significantly decrease the cost of maintaining of outposts and settlements, or use it to notably increase the production efficiency of outposts and settlements. For reference, this production efficiency is a 25% increase to the base production. So, as an example, if we were to enact it, the 500 coal from this coal mining settlement would become 600. 600 from a better coal mining settlement, if we were to upgrade it right away here to show it, instead of 600 would be 750. It is up to you which you wish to embrace. Personally, Steward, I do advocate for the frontier strongholds to make it easier to maintain the settlements at a lower cost, so that the city does not need to spend as many resources to maintain them in the long run. But that is up to you. And as you might have noticed, by sending those people, the city's population has fallen to barely over 15,000. It was over 16,000 at the start of this briefing. So that is something to note, is that when you're upgrading settlements, the effect is immediate. You do not need to wait for travel, but colonization does require time and travel. Each colony does have its own hook, like the city, that needs to be connected to, and each colony can establish one logistics district to provide additional Frostland teams and additional supply. One final building to note would be the logistics bays, which allows more Frostland teams by using the logistics bays slots, depending on whether you're embracing progress or adaptation. And then the freight docks, which increase skyway capacity. This is the amount of resources that can be transferred between sites, but more specifically is between the city and the colonies. Each attended freight dock or automated freight dock built will increase the total skyway capacity by 300 or 500 respectively, allowing the colonies and cities to transfer even more resources between each other at once, allowing for a mutual long-term sustainment of survival should things be established correctly. And keep in mind, your settlements here don't have to always supply the city. As mentioned, they can be set to supply the colony instead. However, a key thing to note here is that wherever it is shipping the resources to, be it the city or the food colony, that area must supply its requirements in return. Since our food colony has exactly 0 materials, it cannot supply the settlement, and therefore the settlement has been disabled until the requirements are met. But since the city has the food and materials to supply it, right now it can freely send it back. The settlements are not limited by the skyways trade route, and they do not apply to the cost at all. But it may still be worthwhile to note where you want to send those resources if you need to micromanage the skyways a bit. I believe one final thing for your briefing, Steward, is to always be wary of the Frostland and the dangers that it is brought. We mentioned the whiteouts before. These whiteouts don't only cut off sites and outposts and settlements that do not have the max upgrade, which is usually at least 2 cores in cost. These whiteouts can affect our colonies too, if they are in the path. Right now, there is an incoming whiteout to the city next year. However, looking at the current reports from the scouts, it indicates that we do not believe the whiteout will be hitting the colony. Now, this may not be correct, Steward. It could be that the whiteout will hit the colony, and it's simply going to hit it later on due to the formation of the whiteout. We cannot yet see it on the map, but once it is close to the city, we will be able to see the whiteout as it approaches our settlements, colonies, and city. The only other final thing to mention that we forgot to go over, Stuart, would probably be the establishment of colonies themselves. You will need 400 prefabs, 20 Frostland teams, a core for the furnace, and of course it will cost 3,000 colonists, who will be sent from the city itself. Please keep in mind that if for whatever reason you suddenly have less than 20 Frostland teams available to be used to establish the colony's establishment will be halted until you rectify that deficit. So, for example, if we were trying to establish a colony and for whatever reason, say our logistics district was now offline and we had a deficit of Frostland teams, our colonization of a new area would be halted until we rectified the issue. This would also begin to shut down expeditions, settlements, outposts, etc. It will cause grave issues, so please make sure that our logistics districts are running at all times, or else our attempts to explore the Frostland will be halted and greatly curtailed. With all that said, Stuart, I believe we have gone over almost everything for the Frostland. Though, keep in mind, there are some things that you might find in the Frostland that we haven't gone over. Things that may have choices for you to make that may help you in time. And at the very least, may resupply us in turn. We are not the only people out here, Stuart, but to our knowledge, we are the only generator city. If the city falls, we fall. The colonies cannot last without the city, but the city will probably not last without colonies and settlements. Please explore the Frostland, Stuart, before our resources run out. Find other people to bring home. Find the elusive steam cores. Colonize the Frostland. Make alliances. And hopefully, establish a city that will last hundreds of years, even in the face of the worst of whiteouts. Thank you for watching this briefing, Stewards. I hope it helped you immensely. Please provide feedback so that we can make additional videos like this in order to help further inform you.